Fine, let's start. Number 1. The Buenos Aires Subte Glyptodont beds. A tunneling crew is cutting a trench under the Argentine capital when a lamp swings across the wall and stops on a curved dome of fused bone the size of a small car, half buried in pale earth. For a moment, nobody speaks. What they have found is not a boulder and not a broken pipe. It is the armored shell of an animal that died before the city, before Argentina, before written history existed at all. The subway they are digging is itself historic. Line A of the Buenos Aires Subte opened on December 1st, 1913, the first underground railway anywhere in the southern hemisphere. To build it, engineers had to cut straight through the ground the city stands on, and that ground is a thick blanket of wind-blown Ice Age silt called Pampean loess. Loess is one of the best natural preservers of bone on Earth. Its fine, chalky dust buries a carcass quickly and buffers the acids that would normally dissolve it. The dome in the wall belonged to a Glyptodont. These were armored mammals related to modern armadillos, but built on a monstrous scale. The genus Glyptodon reached about 3.3 meters long and weighed up to 2 tons, roughly the mass of a small car. Instead of the flexible bands you see on a living armadillo, a Glyptodont carried a single rigid dome made of hundreds of fused bony plates called osteoderms. One relative, Dodecurus, even swung a spiked club of bone on the end of its tail, and the fractures on some shells show these animals fought each other. This ground has produced giants before. A young Charles Darwin collected Glyptodont and other megafauna bones near Buenos Aires and Bahia Blanca in the 1830s, and those fossils helped push him toward the idea of extinction and change over time. Later, the Argentine naturalist Florentino Ameghino built much of South American paleontology on these same pampas beds. Alongside the Glyptodonts lived the giant ground sloth Megatherium, first described by Georges Cuvier in 1796, plus the hoofed Toxodon and the strange, camel-like Macrauchenia. For 2 centuries, nobody knew where Glyptodonts truly belonged on the Tree of Life. That changed in 2016 when a team led by Frederick Delsuc pulled ancient DNA from a Glyptodont shell and proved these tanks were not a separate branch at all. They sat right inside the modern armadillo family, an armadillo swollen to the size of a car. Here is the part that should unsettle you. Glyptodonts survived tens of millions of years, then vanished about 10,000 years ago, at the very end of the last ice age, at almost the exact moment humans spread across South America. An entire body plan, a living armored fortress, was erased from the planet in a geological blink. Why they died is still argued, and there are 3 main answers. The mainstream climate view blames the sharp cooling and drying at the end of the Ice Age, which broke apart the grasslands they fed on. The overkill view blames human hunters, who reached the region at least 13,000 years ago and left cut marks on megafauna bone. A third, combined view says climate weakened the herds and humans finished them. There is even a fringe claim that early people sheltered inside hollowed Glyptodont shells, though most researchers doubt it. It is worth remembering how these giants reached the Pampas at all. When the Isthmus of Panama rose and joined the 2 Americas about 3 million years ago, it opened a 2-way invasion of animals called the Great American Biotic Interchange, and the ancestors of the Glyptodonts spread and diversified across the southern grasslands. The subway that found them is nearly a relic itself, since Line A ran its original Belgian-built wooden La Bourgeoise cars for a full century, until 2013. These bones, though, are young. The next thing a subway can hit is a whole ocean. Number 2. The Paris Metro Tropical Sea. Deep under Paris, a boring face splits open a slab of cream-white stone, and out of it juts the coiled shell of a sea snail longer than a worker's forearm. Around it are hundreds of small coin-shaped discs pressed into the rock. The crew is not standing in a city foundation. They are standing on the floor of a tropical ocean that dried up long before there were people to name it. The Paris Metro opened its first line on July 19th, 1900, timed for the World's Fair. But the stone the whole system is carved from is far older than any fair. It is called Lutetia limestone, and the name matters. Lutetia was the Roman name for Paris, and geologists borrowed it to name an entire slice of deep time, the Lutetian stage of the Eocene epoch. That stage spans roughly 47.8 to 41.2 million years ago. Back then, the Paris Basin lay under a warm, shallow, tropical sea. The limestone that formed on its floor is packed with the bodies of sea creatures. The signature fossil is Campanile giganteum, a sea snail that grew up to 60 centimeters long, a true giant of its kind. Around it lie nummulites, coin-shaped shells of enormous single-celled organisms called foraminifera. The very same creatures built the limestone that the Egyptians later cut into the pyramids. Paris helped invent the science that reads these layers. In the early 1800s, the naturalist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck cataloged thousands of Paris basin mollusks. At the same time, Georges Cuvier and Alexandre Brongniart mapped the strata around the city between 1800 and 1811, and in doing so founded the science of stratigraphy, the reading of Earth's history in stacked layers of rock. The stone they studied, the pale Pierre de Paris, faced Notre Dame, the Louvre, and the grand boulevards of Haussmann City. Digging the Métro meant navigating a haunted underground. Centuries of quarrying this limestone had already hollowed out the catacomb tunnels beneath the streets, and the engineer Fulgence Bienvenu had to weave his lines around them. Along the Seine, the wet, unstable ground was so treacherous that crews sometimes froze the soil solid before they could dig. The Eocene world recorded in that stone was almost unrecognizable. It was a greenhouse Earth with high carbon dioxide and no polar ice caps at all. Reef-building corals in the limestone tell us the water stayed above about 20 degrees Celsius. Paris then hosted lagoons and mangrove-like shores, more like the modern tropics than modern France. That is exactly why scientists now study the Eocene so closely. A hot, high carbon dioxide world is a preview of where a heavily warmed future could go. As the Alpine mountains later rose to the south, the sea that covered Paris slowly drained away, leaving its limestone floor behind as the bedrock of a future city. The reference fossils from that vanished ocean now fill the collections of the Paris Natural History Museum, the same institution that helped found the very study of extinction. So consider what actually happens every single day. Millions of commuters ride through the fossilized floor of a vanished tropical ocean and never feel the strangeness of it. And yet, this drowned sea is only 47 million years old. There is rock a subway can cut that is older than animals themselves. Number 3. The Stockholm Tunnelbana Bedrock. A lone commuter stands on a Stockholm platform, and above her the ceiling is not tile or concrete. It is raw, blasted rock, painted a deep blood red, arching overhead like the inside of a cave. She is waiting for a train inside stone that is older than complex life on Earth. The Stockholm Metro, the Tunnelbana, opened in 1950, and its builders did something unusual. Rather than line every station, they left much of the bedrock exposed, blasted open, and then decorated. The result is often called the world's longest art gallery, with more than 90 stations turned into artworks, many painted straight onto the ancient rock. Solna Centrum, with its red cavern ceiling, is the most famous example. That rock belongs to the Fennoscandian Shield, also called the Baltic Shield, some of the oldest crust in all of Europe. The gneiss and granite around Stockholm formed roughly 1.8 to 1.9 billion years ago during a mountain building event called the Svekofenian orogeny. To grasp that number, you have to leave the age of animals entirely. 1.9 billion years ago falls in the Paleoproterozoic, long before complex life, when the atmosphere was still adjusting after the Great Oxidation Event first flooded the air with oxygen. This kind of rock cannot be tunneled softly. Crews had to drill and blast their way through solid crystalline stone. The rock itself is a record of violence deep in the crust, where heat and pressure once folded ordinary sediment into the banded, swirling gneiss you can now touch on your way to work. Geologists date it with astonishing precision by measuring uranium and lead trapped inside tiny zircon crystals, which survive one mountain building cycle after another like microscopic time capsules. The shield is not just old, it is quietly useful. It holds the Proterozoic iron and copper ores that Sweden mined for centuries at Kiruna and Falun, and its long-term stability makes it a leading candidate for storing nuclear waste, as planned at Forsmark. And unlike the Paris limestone, this stone holds no fossils at all. It formed before there were shells or bones to leave. The deep time here is pure age, the raw antiquity of the crust. The ice, at least, is recent. Great glaciers scoured this bedrock as little as 10,000 years ago, polishing and scratching its surface, and the land is still slowly rising several millimeters a year now that the weight of that ice is gone. Those same glaciers left long scratches and polished surfaces on the rock, so the wall of a single station can carry both a nearly 2 billion year old history and the fresh gouges of the last ice age side by side. Here is the stakes of it. A person's ordinary daily platform is carved from stone older than the first multicellular life anywhere on this planet. If you compressed all of Earth's history into a single day, this rock formed before dawn, while animals do not appear until the last hour before midnight. From a dead world of bare rock, the next stop takes us into a sea already crowded with the first great predators. Number 4. The Montreal Metro Ordovician seafloor. Blasting crews cutting a station wall under Montreal expose a slab of gray stone, and locked inside it is a straight, tapering shell more than a meter long, the remains of a squid-like hunter that ruled the sea 500 million years before the city existed. The Montreal Metro opened on October 14, 1966, just ahead of the World's Fair. Expo 67. The island the city sits on is a flat shelf of sedimentary rock, and that rock is Ordovician limestone and shale, roughly 450 to 470 million years old. In the Ordovician, this ground lay under a warm, shallow tropical sea on the ancient continent of Laurentia, well south of the equator. That seafloor teemed with life, and the limestone recorded it. The rock holds brachiopods, bryozoans, corals, sea lilies, trilobites, and the straight-shelled cephalopods called orthocone nautiloids. Those nautiloids were the apex predators of their day, some growing well over a meter long, jetting through the water and seizing prey with tentacles. The local rock units, the Trenton Group, and the Utica Shale have been studied since the 1800s, and the Geological Survey of Canada, founded in 1842 under William Logan, documented them early. 2 of the fossils deserve a closer look, because they are easy to misread. The sea lilies, or crinoids, were not plants. They were animals related to starfish, anchored to the seafloor on stalks made of stacked discs of calcite. The brachiopods look like clams, but belong to a completely separate branch of life, with shells built on a different symmetry. When the Metro stone is cut and polished, these creatures appear in cross-section, sliced open like anatomical diagrams. The Ordovician sea did not end gently. It closed with a mass extinction, the second largest in the history of life, which wiped out perhaps 85% of species. That catastrophe is tied to a sudden glaciation of the southern supercontinent, Gondwana, which chilled the oceans and dropped sea levels around the world. Long afterward, about 125 million years ago, molten rock punched up through these flat layers to form Montreal, the hill that gives the city its name. The stakes are almost comic in their scale. Every day, commuters walk down into the fossilized floor of a half-billion-year-old ocean simply to catch a train, passing predators and reef dwellers frozen in the walls. There are three threads scientists still pull on here. What exactly triggered the end Ordovician extinction? Glaciation, or something stranger? Why this particular limestone is so extraordinarily rich in fossils, and how the young volcanic intrusion of Montreal broke through a landscape otherwise flat and ancient. The Ordovician was not only an age of death, but of explosive life, for the Great Ordovician biodiversification event saw marine diversity multiply, filling the seas with new families of corals, brachiopods, and shelled hunters. The gray limestone that recorded it later became a building material in its own right, quarried on the island for Montreal's historic stone facades, and relied upon as a major aquifer across eastern North America. If a seafloor in the wall feels strange, wait until you see a whole ocean polished into palace marble. Number 5. The Moscow Metro Fossil Marble. Under the chandeliers of a grand Moscow station, a passenger leans against a polished wall and finds herself staring into the perfect spiral of an ammonite, a coiled shell chambered like a tiny galaxy, sliced open and set into the stone she is touching. She is surrounded by the dead of an ocean 300 million years gone. The Moscow Metro opened on May 15, 1935, built as a showcase of Soviet power and art. To make its stations feel like palaces, the builders clad them in polished marble and marble-like limestone. What they may not have advertised is that the stone is full of fossils. At stations such as Kropotkinskaya, you can pick out ammonites, straight-shelled nautiloids, corals, and the stacked discs of sea lily stems in the wall panels. The decorative stone was quarried from across the Soviet Union, including Carboniferous and Jurassic marine limestones. Moscow itself sits on Carboniferous limestone about 300 million years old, long quarried as Moscow marble. In the Carboniferous, warm, shallow seas covered this region and laid down thick beds of fossil-rich rock, while giant forests grew on the nearby land. The same forests that would later become coal. The fossils in the walls are a lesson in extinct life. Ammonites were shelled cephalopods, relatives of today's squid and octopus, and the wavy suture lines where their internal walls met the shell are so distinctive that scientists use them to tell species apart. The sea lily stems appear as stacks of little discs, which quarry workers across Europe once nicknamed starstones. Because the Metro's stone was cut and polished flat, the saw accidentally opened these animals up, revealing the internal chambers of ammonites and the delicate structure of crinoids. This has turned the Metro into an accidental museum. Geologists and enthusiasts now run fossil spotting tours through the stations, and the most ornate halls, like Komsomolskaya, mix stone from several quarries, so a single platform can display creatures from different ancient seas side by side. Some of the fossils are not Carboniferous at all, but Jurassic, carried in from the ammonite-rich clays south of the city. For comparison, the Russian Paleontological Institute in Moscow holds world-class collections from these same periods. The habit of reading fossils and building stone even has a name now, urban geology, and the Moscow Metro is its cathedral. The stone runs deep in more ways than one, since many of these stations were dug far underground to double as bomb shelters, so passengers descend past a 300 million year old seabed into rock built to survive a war. Sit with the strange stakes of it. These stations were built as monuments to a political system, propaganda palaces meant to glorify the state, and they are literally paved and paneled with the corpses of an ocean that died 300 million years before any state existed. 3 questions still hang over the stone. How so many fossils survived being sawn and polished intact? Which ancient seas each quarry's stone was drawn from? And what the ammonites, so successful and then so utterly gone, tell us about how even dominant life can vanish. Fossils sealed in stone are one kind of shock. Whole elephants buried under the busiest city on Earth are another. Number 6. The Tokyo Metro Naumann elephant. Beneath the neon and the crowds of Tokyo, diggers working the wet subsurface lift a long curved tusk out of black clay, and just above it runs a pale band of ancient white shells. In the busiest transit system in the world, they have pulled an Ice Age elephant out of the ground. Tokyo's first subway, the Ginza Line, opened on December 30th, 1927, the oldest subway in all of Asia. The city sits on the Kanto Plain, a thick pile of soft Pleistocene and Holocene sediment, clays and sands, and volcanic ash. That soft ground hides the bones of Paleoloxodon naumannii, the Naumann elephant, an Ice Age elephant that lived across Japan until roughly 20,000 years ago. The animal is named after Heinrich Edmund Naumann, a German geologist who helped found modern geology in Japan in the 1870s. The elephant stood about 2.5 to 3 meters at the shoulder, smaller than a mammoth, with distinctive bumps on its forehead and molars ridged like washboards for grinding tough plants. Its bones, along with those of the giant deer Cynomegaceraus, are dredged in great numbers from Lake Nojiri in Nagano, and construction and dredging around Tokyo have repeatedly turned up its teeth and bones in the layers beneath the streets. Tokyo's underground hides human deep time as well. Buried across the city are Jomon shell mounds, called kaizuka, heaps of discarded shells left by ancient people. The most famous, the Omori shell mound, was spotted in 1877 by the American zoologist Edward Morse, who glimpsed the exposed shells from the window of a passing train. His excavation is regarded as the birth of Japanese archaeology. Those middens even record ancient sea levels, because during a warm phase called the Jomon transgression, the ocean pushed far inland. The elephants themselves were travelers. During glacial periods, when so much water was locked in ice that sea level dropped, land bridges connected Japan to the mainland, and the Naumann elephants crossed over. Stone tools found with elephant and deer bones at Lake Nojiri hint that early people hunted or butchered them. To even reach these layers safely, Japanese engineers pioneered advanced earth pressure balance shield machines, because the wet ground would otherwise flood a tunnel. Even dating these layers depends on catastrophe, for bands of volcanic ash from nearby peaks, including Mount Fuji, form the reddish Kanto loam that lets geologists pin each stratum in time. The National Museum of Nature and Science in Tokyo now curates the Naumann elephant material pulled from this ground. Here is the weight of it. Beneath the brightest, most crowded modern city on the planet lie the bones of elephants that walked a colder, emptier Japan, and they died out just as human hunters spread and the ice retreated. The debate splits three ways. Some argue human hunting drove the extinction. Others blame the warming climate that ended the Ice Age and changed the vegetation. Many suspect both work together. What is not in doubt is the timing. The elephants vanished right as our species arrived in force. Soft ground hides bones. But a subway can also cut into rock from the world that existed right after life itself nearly ended. Number 7. The Sydney Metro Triassic Sandstone. A tunnel boring machine grinds forward under Sydney, and its cutting head bites into honey gold rock, spitting out a fresh slab printed with the fossil ripples of a river that flowed before the dinosaurs reached their prime. The crew is carving through the deadened world that followed the worst catastrophe life ever suffered. Sydney Metro, the largest public transport project in Australia, opened its first fully automated line in 2019, running deep bored tunnels beneath the harbour city. Sydney sits in the Sydney Basin, and the rock it cuts is Hawkesbury sandstone, roughly 230 to 247 million years old, laid down in the Triassic period. The Triassic matters because of what came just before it. It followed the end Permian mass extinction, the single greatest die-off in the history of the planet, which killed about 90% of all marine species. The Triassic is the story of life clawing its way back from that abyss, and it was during this recovery that the archosaurs, the group that would give rise to the dinosaurs, began to rise. The Hawkesbury Sandstone itself was laid down by a vast system of braided rivers, sweeping sheets of sand across the ancient basin. You can still read those rivers in the rock, in the sloping crossbedding and the ripple marks that preserve the very direction the currents once flowed. Body fossils are rare here, but the basin has yielded temnospondyl amphibians, lungfish, fish, and fossil plants in the shales between the sandstone, along with the seed fern flora called dicroidium that carpeted the southern supercontinent. This same stone shaped the human city above it. The warm-colored Sydney sandstone, nicknamed Yellow Block, built colonial Sydney's grandest buildings, and Aboriginal people carved thousands of rock engravings into its surface, a thin human layer pressed onto rock 250 million years old. Beneath the sandstone lie the Permian Illawarra coal measures, mined for generations around the city. For engineers, the sandstone is a mixed gift, its uniform strength made boring predictable, but the abrasive grains chewed at the cutting heads, and its porosity makes it one of the region's most important groundwater aquifers. Feel the quiet horror of the timing. Sydney's newest, most futuristic trains glide through rock deposited in a stunned, half-empty world, the immediate aftermath of a global extinction that nearly ended complex life. 3 threads run through this stone. What exactly the end Permian extinction did to the planet, and how life rebuilt afterward. How a river's sandstone becomes both dramatic cliffs and vital aquifers. And why, in a basin this large, animal fossils are so scarce that we read the age mostly from the sediment itself. The flat-lying strata also raise the dramatic sandstone cliffs of the Blue Mountains and Sydney Harbor, and nearby Triassic beds preserve delicate horseshoe crab trackways, the frozen footprints of animals that crossed a tidal flat 250 million years ago. From a recovering world, the next stop drops us into a warm sea prowled by sharks. Number 8. The Lisbon Metro Miocene Reef. A tunnel lamp swings across a pale yellow wall beneath Lisbon, and there, jutting from a crowd of fossil shells, is a black triangular tooth as long as a thumb, the tooth of a shark that hunted a warm sea where the Portuguese capital now stands. The Lisbon Metro opened on December 29th, 1959, the first in Portugal. The city rests on the lower Tagus Basin, filled with Miocene marine sediments between about 5 and 23 million years old. These Lisbon beds are famous among paleontologists because the Miocene sea that flooded the Tagus Valley turned the site of Lisbon into a warm, shallow gulf, and its floor filled with life. The fossils read like an inventory of a lost ocean. There are shark teeth, ray plates, bivalves, sea snails, corals, and the bones of marine mammals. The shark teeth include the genera Isurus and Carcharhinus, and the giant line of Ototus, the family that produced the largest shark that ever lived. Megalodon, Ototus megalodon, cruised these Atlantic waters in the Miocene, an animal estimated at 15 to 18 meters long, and its serrated teeth turn up in the region's marine beds. Alongside the sharks swam early dolphins and seals. Portugal helped map all of this. 19th century geologists Carlos Ribeiro and Joaquim Felipe Neri Delgado charted these strata, and the Museu Geológico in Lisbon still holds their historic collections. One of those collections became infamous. The so-called Ribeiro flints were once claimed to be tools made by humans in the Miocene, which would have rewritten human origins, but the claim was tested and rejected. A cautionary tale about wishful reading of the rocks. The Miocene world these fossils record was warmer than today, with higher seas that flooded low coastal basins, and reef corals grew during its warmest stretches. The rock preserves repeated cycles of that flooding, alternating marine layers with river deposits as the sea rose and fell. The modern Tagus estuary, a drowned river valley, is a faint echo of those ancient floods. Construction across Lisbon, the Metro included, keeps slicing into these fossil-rich layers. The Miocene mollusks of Lisbon were so well studied that they helped anchor the classic biostratigraphy used to correlate marine stages across Europe. And because those same soft sediments amplify shaking, the memory of Lisbon's catastrophic earthquake history shapes how every modern tunnel here is engineered. The image is hard to shake. Beneath Lisbon's tiled streets and pastel buildings lie the shed teeth of sharks that once tore through a vanished Atlantic Gulf, including the kin of the largest predatory shark in Earth's history. 3 questions keep researchers busy. Just how warm the Miocene really was, and what that says about a warming future. Whether Megalodon itself truly patrolled this exact gulf, or only its relatives, and why these particular beds are so extraordinarily rich in marine life. Warm sea teeth are millions of years old, but a subway can also uncover Ice Age giants lying just below a modern capital. Number 9. The Vienna U-Bahn Ice Age bones. In a shored construction pit beneath a Vienna U-Bahn sign, resting in pale, wind-blown dust, lies the curved tusk and heavy leg bone of a woolly mammoth, an Ice Age monster surfacing under a modern European capital. Vienna's modern U-Bahn opened in stages from 1978, though the city's rail history reaches back to the 19th century Stadtbahn. Vienna sits in the Vienna Basin, a basin filled first with marine Miocene sediments and later capped with Ice Age loess, the same fine wind-blown glacial dust that preserves bones so well in Buenos Aires. In that loess lie the remains of mammoths and woolly rhinoceros. This region is one of the great treasure houses of the Ice Age. The Venus of Willendorf, a carved figurine about 29,000 years old, was found in the Loess of Lower Austria in 1908, not far from the city. Vienna itself preserves an old legend. A huge bone, most likely a mammoth bone, was reportedly dug from a cellar and mounted at St. Stephen's Cathedral, which is why one of its gates is still nicknamed the Giant's Door. Medieval people, finding these enormous bones, genuinely believed they were the remains of giants and monsters. Vienna was also a world capital of geology. The great Eduard Suess taught here, named the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, coined the word biosphere, and used his knowledge of the basin to engineer the city's fresh spring water supply. Deeper below the Loess lies the marine Miocene, the Badenian Sea of about 14 to 16 million years ago, which left its own marine fossils under the streets. The mammoths themselves belong to the species Mammuthus primigenius, the woolly mammoth, which survived in Central Europe until roughly 10 to 14,000 years ago. They shared a cold, dry grassland called the Mammoth Steppe with the woolly rhinoceros, Culodonta antiquitatis, a landscape that once stretched across Eurasia and has no true equivalent today. Paleolithic hunters camped along the Danube at sites like Krems and Willendorf, leaving behind accumulations of mammoth bone. Subway and foundation digs cut through these Danube terrace gravels and loess, and modern isotope studies of Austrian mammoth bone let scientists reconstruct the vanished steppe and its climate. The Natural History Museum Vienna, opened in 1889, still guards both the Ice Age material and the Venus figurine, while the deeper Miocene rock of the basin feeds Austria's petroleum fields, tying the city's ancient seabeds to its modern economy. Here is the haunting part. A great city that once mistook these bones for giants was, in fact, standing on the graveyard of real giants, animals that died out just as human hunters and a warming climate closed in around them. As with the other Ice Age deaths, 3 explanations compete: human overkill, climate warming, or a combination of the two. The folklore of the Giant's Door is a reminder that people always sensed something enormous slept beneath their feet, even when they misread what it was. Old World mammoths lead naturally to their New World cousin, waiting under an American downtown. Number 10. the San Francisco Central Subway Mammoth Tooth. A gloved hand lifts a heavy, ridged molar out of the tunnel mud beneath downtown San Francisco, and behind it, half swallowed by the same wet ground, loom the timber ribs of a sailing ship from the gold rush. In one block of earth, an Ice Age elephant and the 19th century lie stacked together. San Francisco's Central Subway, an extension of the Muni Metro T-line, was bored beneath downtown during the 2010s and opened in 2022. During tunneling and related downtown excavation, crews recovered the tooth of a Colombian mammoth, reported around 2013. Mammothus columbi was a warm-climate North American mammoth, larger than the woolly mammoth, standing up to 4 meters tall. California is famous for such megafauna, most of all at the La Brea tar pits down in Los Angeles. The city's waterfront hides a second kind of deep time, a human one. Much of it is built on artificial fill poured over the harbor, and buried in that fill are Gold Rush-era ships from the 1840s and 50s, abandoned when their crews rushed off to the goldfields. Subway and foundation work downtown keep striking these vessels, which are protected as archaeological sites when found. The mammoth's molar is a marvel of engineering in its own right. Its surface is a washboard of enamel ridges, built for grinding tough grasses, and the animal grew these teeth on a lifelong conveyor, pushing worn ones out and new ones forward. The Columbian mammoth went extinct at the end of the Ice Age, around 11 to 13,000 years ago, and ancient DNA has even shown that Columbian and woolly mammoths interbred where their ranges met. The Ice Age Bay Area was a different world. With so much water locked in ice, sea level sat about 120 meters lower, and San Francisco Bay was not a bay at all, but a dry valley, with the Farallon Islands standing as hills on an exposed coastal plain. Across that landscape roamed mammoths, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and giant ground sloths. All of it sits atop the active San Andreas and Hayward faults, which make any deep tunneling here a delicate act. Muni's single boring machine had to thread between the pilings and foundations of downtown towers, and the regional Pleistocene fossils it disturbed are curated nearby at the California Academy of Sciences. The stakes are written right there in the mud. Under a single city block lie a gold rush shipwreck and an Ice Age elephant, human history, and deep time layered one on the other. 3 lines of thought converge here. Whether human hunting or a warming climate ended California's megafauna, how a lone molar can survive tens of thousands of years buried in bay mud, and how mapping these buried channels and fossils now guides both engineering and planning for rising seas. Bones and buried ships are shallow finds, though. The last stop takes us into the roots of a mountain range. Number 11. The New York Subway Manhattan Schist. Deep beneath 2nd Avenue, blasting crews break through into dark, glittering rock, its surface flecked with mica that catches the work lights. This is not just bedrock. It is the eroded root of a mountain range that rose and fell 450 million years ago. The New York City subway opened on October 27, 1904, and the long-delayed 2nd Avenue subway finally opened its first phase on January 1, 2017. Manhattan is anchored in hard metamorphic bedrock, chiefly Manhattan schist, the same rock the great skyscrapers grip. That schist formed about 450 million years ago during the Ordovician, in a mountain-building event called the tectonic orogeny. Its origin story is one of transformation. The schist began as ordinary deep-sea mud. Then, as ancient oceans closed and continents ground together, that mud was buried, cooked, and squeezed until it recrystallized into a hard, foliated rock shot through with mica, garnet, and sometimes the blue mineral kyanite, all born of intense heat and pressure. The tectonic orogeny that did this was a slow-motion collision, a volcanic island arc crashing into ancient North America, one early step in the assembly of the supercontinent Pangaea. The city above is quietly shaped by this rock. Beneath Manhattan lies a trio of ancient stone, the Manhattan schist, the Inwood Marble, and the Fordham Gneiss, and that gneiss is over 1 billion years old. Where the hard schist rises close to the surface, in Midtown and downtown, skyscrapers cluster because their foundations can grip it. Where it plunges deep, as beneath Greenwich Village, the skyline drops low. The very shape of New York's famous skyline is a map of its deep-time geology. The 2nd Avenue subway required blasting a deep cavern straight through this schist, using carefully controlled explosives beneath one of the densest neighborhoods on Earth. Long before the engineers arrived, glaciers of the last ice age scraped across the same rock, and you can still see their polished, scratched surfaces in Central Park outcrops like Rat Rock. Like the stone of Stockholm, this schist holds no fossils. It was forged too deep and too violently. The deep time here is metamorphic rock, the memory of a mountain range. Let the stakes land. Every commuter riding the Midtown subway passes through the roots of a mountain range, 450 million years old, a chain of peaks worn down to nothing while the rock beneath still holds the city up. 3 threads close the story. How soft sea mud becomes hard. Glittering schist. Why the depth of that bedrock quietly dictates where New York can build tall, so that geologists map the foliation of the schist, the direction its minerals were smeared during the collision, precisely to predict how the rock will behave as crews blast. And what the garnets and mica record about the violence that made them. From young bones to billion-year roots, a single subway is a core sample through all of time. Step back, and a pattern comes into focus. Subways are the deepest, most continuous excavation that human beings routinely carry out inside their own cities. No other project cuts so far down, so persistently, through ground that has otherwise sat undisturbed for ages. Boring machines and cut and cover trenches expose fresh faces of rock and sediment that can run for kilometers, opening windows into layers no shovel would ever reach. There is a deeper reason cities keep hitting deep time. People built their great cities where rivers met the sea, on sheltered harbors, on defensible rock. Those are exactly the settings that preserve the past. River valleys and coasts that bury fossils in soft sediment, and hard bedrock that records the crust's oldest history. To found a lasting city is, almost by accident, to plant it on an archive. The type of ground decides what turns up. Soft ground cities like Tokyo, Buenos Aires, and Lisbon yield bones and shells and teeth. Hard rock cities like Stockholm and New York expose ancient crust instead, the raw stone of vanished mountains. And there is a cruel symmetry in it. The very sediments that trap fossils best, the wet clays and loess, are also the most dangerous and difficult to tunnel through. Increasingly, the diggers plan for it. On mega projects like London's Crossrail, engineers and archaeologists worked side by side, with a dedicated program to record what came out of the ground. And the record keeps improving, because rescue and salvage archaeology laws in many countries now require major digs to be monitored, so the fossils and artifacts that once vanished into spoil heaps are increasingly cataloged instead. Because in the end, a single subway line is a vertical core sample through a city's entire history, from the modern fill at the top to the oldest rock at the bottom, read one layer at a time. Set these finds together, and they compress an almost unimaginable stretch of time into the length of a single commute. From 1,000-year-old bones to billion-year-old stone, the whole span sits stacked beneath the platforms. Nothing that human beings have ever built rivals the age of the ground it stands on. Our entire civilization is a thin film, spread over deep time, and a subway shaft cuts straight through it. The bones carry a warning worth hearing. The Glyptodonts, the Mammoths, the Naumann elephants, all of these giants vanished quickly, in the same narrow window when the climate lurched and human hunters spread. Large animals proved fragile when the world changed fast, and that is not only a fact about the past. The ancient seas whisper the same lesson from the other direction. The warm, high carbon dioxide oceans that laid down the stone beneath Paris, Lisbon, Montreal, and Moscow are studied today as previews of a warming ocean future. And the bedrock of Stockholm and New York reminds us that even the solid ground of a city is really a frozen moment of collision and catastrophe, mountains raised and worn to nothing. This is what the field of urban geology offers, quietly turning millions of commuters into unwitting time travelers. The deepest disturbance is not any single fossil. It is perspective. The city feels permanent, eternal, fixed, yet it sits on the ruins of oceans, ice ages, and lost giants. And every stairwell down into a station descends not just into the earth, but into the past. Perhaps that is the real gift hidden in a subway, that it forces a proud, hurried city to travel downward through time, whether it means to or not, past its own foundations and into the deep. If the deep past still has questions for you, there is another investigation waiting on your screen right now, and subscribing keeps them coming.